Hi guys and welcome. In this video we're going to be taking a little look at the ubiquitous Baumgartner 866 pin lever escapement movement. It's a Swiss movement, but a very simple pin pallet escapement movement, and ranging in joule count from 1 to 17 joules. Obviously the higher the joule count, the better the quality with regards to how well the train would run. This is a very simple 1 joule movement. In this particular case, the 1 joule being the cap joule for the balance cock on the actual balance cock itself. And this, as you can see from the wheels, we're looking at the front of it here, this is a jump power. It is in fact my very first jump power watch. They're one of those things that I never took great interest in for a long while, because they're all very sort of chunky, square, retro-ish looking, or the vast majority are. This one is a Trafalgar, which is a really nice looking one, and as soon as I saw it I thought, I like that, it's a bit different. I've always liked the idea of jump powers, but I've never been overly keen on the design. This however is really nice, so I bought myself this and I'm in the midst of servicing it. Here is the dial. So we've got the hours at the top, minutes here, a date window at the bottom, and then a center seconds hand which sweeps around just like a normal watch. And as you can see, it looks like a normal watch face. The obvious difference being that it has jump power wheels, but it does have a sweeping seconds hand, and there it is with the case on. There I was stripping away the movement, and it was the top side with the train barrel, escapement, etc. all came away very straightforward, as they usually are. As I say, they're a very simple movement. And then I got to this side and hit a bit of a snag in the fact that I expected the centre wheel, this one here, to simply lift away, which it absolutely refused to do. I did a little bit of asking around on a couple of watch groups that I'm on, and I got a reply from a fella called Joe, Noirak 1J, on the Watch Repair Talk group, which is an excellent resource for anybody into working on watches, which is a forum run by Mark Lovick, who has an excellent YouTube channel, and I'm sure you already know that if you're watching watch related working things. It does indeed pull away, and he had to lever it off, and he explained the process, and that gave me a little bit more confidence and a bit less to worry about with regards to removing this. And using a couple of screwdrivers, I very carefully levered away at each side bit by bit. It was going absolutely nowhere. So what I ended up doing ultimately was the exact same thing, with the addition of a little bit of gentle heat using the tip of a soldering iron on this inner brass part where there is no paint that you can see. And I heated up soldering iron and very carefully held that around here in a couple of spots opposite here and here, and then worked it a little bit. And I did this 2 or 3 times, and eventually this disc did in fact just pop away. So and as you can see, there's the disc, which is loose obviously now. That's the underside of it, and you can see it's actually quite a thick section that is a friction fit on here, just like our own minute hand would be. The Baumgartner 866 pin pallet escapement movement is out of the wash, and I wasn't going to do a video on this at all, because this is just a watch that I'm cleaning and servicing for myself. It's one that I bought because I like the look of it, and as said, my first jump power watch. But this movement is used in many watches, sort of 60s and 70s watches, and I wasn't going to do a video on this because I assumed that there would be lots of stuff on YouTube about servicing this movement because it is so common. And apparently I was wrong. I'm going to grease and refit the mainspring. So with the spring rewound into the barrel and the barrel lid refixed, we start to reassemble the motion side of the movement. Here fitting the intermediate wheel, post of which was greased. On top of this is added the unit for where the stem affixes. This is normally built into a watch plate and is a separate unit on this particular watch, which is held in place by 2 equal length screws. We then proceed onto the train of wheels. The centre wheel is already fixed in place, as you can see. And these are a little tricky to see the posts at first because the holes are very tiny for the small pivots, and because they're not jeweled, they're much more difficult to see than a jeweled hole would be. The barrel is inserted and the barrel cap has a gear affixed to it, so this has to be slid underneath the center wheel. As you can see, and once in place, that's given a little turn to make sure that it's operating all of the going train as it should be. Next on is the escape wheel, and again this is checked to make sure that everything is meshing together as it should. Here I'm adding a little bit of oil to the top of the barrel arbor before fitting the top plate. This particular bit is very tricky and takes a lot of patience and wiggling to get it in place, so to save you the boredom of watching a couple of minutes of that, we skipped through that, and the top plate is then refastened. Here is the largest of the 4 screws that hold the top plate in position, and this also acts as a buffer for the click and spring combined, which you see being fitted there. Here I'm just adding the plate and screw for the pallet fork, but without the pallet fork. This is just to hold everything securely in place. We then fit the crown wheel, remembering that this is a left-hand thread. And lubricating the post accordingly. Following this, we fit the ratchet wheel. Securing it in place with its large headed screw, and then check the operation of the click and spring combined to make sure that it is performing correctly. Here I'm using a pair of tweezers to hold the ratchet wheel in place while I tighten up the screw in the centre of the arbor. Onto the pallet fork, which is positioned in place, and the pallet fork cock is refitted along with its screw. Each of the pins and the pivots of this pallet fork are lubricated. Ordinarily the pivots would not be lubricated on a jewelled movement, but this being on metal pivots on metal pivot holes, and the pins of course being metal, they are typically lubricated. Next to fit is the balance cock. The lower jewel, which is a metal jewel end stone, is already in place. The upper one, which is the sole jewel in the entire watch, is not yet fitted. That is just being fitted at this stage here. And as mentioned before, this is always my favourite part of the rebuild, when you get to see the heartbeat once the balance is in place. It's such a nice sight to see that start to spin. Especially so when it's a watch that either wasn't running at all or was running very, very poorly prior to stripping and cleaning. The jewel is held in place by a Diashock type spring, a triangular spring with 3 lugs which fit into 3 slots, very much like the Seiko system, but more awkward to refit because of the fact that it fits into 3 separate slots. You can actually buy or make a tool which will fit over the spring and depress all 3 of the lugs simultaneously and then turn it in place, and sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't. I had actually tried I have a tool made from a cocktail stick for this purpose, but unfortunately it didn't seem to want to work on this particular one, so here I'm using a pair of tweezers to manipulate the shock spring into place. The early versions of the BFG 866 movement used a fixed end stone which is screwed into place like you would see on pocket watches. We now move on to the dial side of the watch, fitting the winding pinion, the clutch wheel and the stem. I realised at that point, there was a bit to cut out there, because I realised at that point that I had completely forgotten to fit the setting lever post screw into the works on the other side, which meant I had to remove the top plate again to fit the setting lever screw in place and put that in, which was a little bit of a fiddle, and then back to the dial side once that was in place, and the setting lever and the yoke were fitted back into place, which are both very straightforward procedures. At this point here we move on to the dial ring, and you can see the star-shaped gear at the bottom. So the dial ring, the jumper ring that clicks it around, the star-shaped spring that actually moves it around once every 2 rotations, and the cover plate are fitted. And then the slot up on the upper left is where the click spring fits in place afterwards, and there I was just testing it and getting that to the date jump. Here I'm fitting the inner ring, which is the hour ring, and aligning that, as you can see there, the 12 and the date at the bottom, which is currently on number 5, is aligned up, because the date has to change at 12. This wheel has two sets of 12, and obviously it has to be set so that it changes while that dial is at 12. And here I'm fitting the dial just to check and see that that works, because it's harder to see when the movement is wide open. And in fact, when I first assembled it, I had got it set so that the date was changing at 1 rather than 12, so I had to take that apart and just readjust the hour wheel. And then once that's all in place with the click and spring and such, the minute wheel simply presses back onto the system. Once everything is aligned by turning it so that the date changes over, I then make sure the minute wheel is set to 0, the hour to 12, the date has just changed over, and then the seconds hand is refitted, and I wind the movement to set it going, and turn it around to do a little bit of a check. And in this part here you can see a time lapse where I left the watch running at 11 p.m. just to make absolutely certain that both the date and the hour change over as they should, which, as you can see right there, they do. So it's a little cut down, apologies for that, but hopefully you found this useful, and thank you for watching.